Hi mathematicians. This is the first in a series of videos where we are going to analyze the points that were scored by individual basketball players during the 1992 University of Kentucky versus Duke NCAA tournament game. This is still a game that breaks the hearts of a lot of University of Kentucky fans because they barely lost. And I wanted to do a little analysis to see if we could use statistics to determine, was it just luck that Duke won, or were they actually the better team? Before we can do that analysis, though, we have to learn how to do a couple of basics. So, without further ado, here we go with the first. So the first basic concept we need to learn about is how to calculate something called quartiles. I'm going to give you just a second if you need to pause the video to write down that learning target. I'm going to assume that you've done that, and remember to pause the video as much as you need to, but I'm going to go ahead and go to step 1. And in order to calculate the quartiles of a data set, the data must be ordered least to greatest. So our list does not have those player scores in order from least to greatest. So we need to do that first. So I'm going to write them in a little row right down here, starting with the 3 zeros that I have. One. Then next I've got a 5. Actually, I've got a couple of 5s, don't I? Then I have a 9. Next would be that 16. And then 18. Then 21 and 28. So step 1, we've got them in order from least to greatest. The next step is that we need to calculate the median of the data set. So we recall from previous lessons that the median for a set of data is what is right there, the middle number. So if I look at the first half of my data, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 numbers. In the back, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 numbers, which means that that number right there in the middle is 5. You're going to notice that I've color-coded my notes. That is something that I really like to do a lot because I feel like it's helpful. I really strongly suggest that you do that as well. If you need to pause the video to go get yourself some colored pencils or markers or something, that'd be a great idea. Otherwise, I'm going to assume you've already done that. So our step 1, we put them in order from least to greatest. Step 2, we found the median of the data set. Our next step is that we need to find the median of the lower half of the data set. So when I talk about the lower half, I'm talking about these guys right here. Because basically what I've done is the median kind of like acts as like an axe that kind of chops the data in half. So you've got a lower half and an upper half. That median is kind of like the wall that separates the lower half from the upper half of the numbers. So now if I look at the lower half of that data set, I know that I have 2 numbers here in the front. I have 2 numbers there in the back. So that means that the median of that lower half of the data set is 0. And the median of that lower half is also known as also called something called the lower quartile. So the lower quartile, and oh, that really looks like it's one word, doesn't it? I need to separate that. So lower quartile, and it's also called the Q1 for short. So now for my next step, I calculated the lower quartile or the Q1 already. Guess what? There's also an upper quartile. So that is going to be my next step. I'm going to find the median of the upper half. So that upper half will be this half right up here that's in the blue. And I have 2 numbers in the front, 2 numbers in the back, which means that middle number is going to be 18. So I found the median of my upper half of my numbers. And this is also called the upper quartile. Now, you would think it would be called, for short, the Q2, since the lower quartile is called the Q1, and that's actually not the case. It's called the Q3. And the reason for that is, I'm going to label up here at the top. So the lower quartile is called the Q1. The median, we don't call it this. We almost never call it this, but it's technically the quartile 2. And that makes the upper quartile the quartile 3, just so that you know where those numbers come from. So we have now completed the process of finding the quartiles. So the quartiles that we wanted in this case are, so the quartile 1 equals 0, the quartile 2, or the median, is 5, and the quartile 3, or the upper quartile, is 18. So we have now found all of the quartiles for this particular data set, which I've put right there in the box. So now we're going to find another set of quartiles, and this time we're going to do that for the individual players on Duke's basketball team. And I'm going to go through the steps, but I'm going to abbreviate them because we do have a longer written version of all the steps. So step 1, least to greatest, right? So I'm going to take those scores for each individual player, and I'm going to write them in order from least to greatest. So starting with the 0, got a couple of 4s, an 11, a 13, 19, 22, and finally 31. Make that just a little neater. Okay, so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 scores, which is what I should have. So we know that the first step is to find it in order from least to greatest. The next step is to find the median. And this one's a little different from the last example, which is why I wanted to use this one. So if we look closely, we see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers in the front. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers in the back. So recall from previous lessons what we do in order to find the median of a data set if we don't have that one number in the middle. So we need to find that number that's in between the 11 and the 13. So remember what you do is you take those two middle numbers. So I'm going to add together 11 plus 13, which is 24. Then I'm going to divide that 24 by 2. So that means the median in this particular case is the number that's halfway between 11 and 13, which is going to be 12. Now, in the previous example, when we had one number in the middle, we kind of like used that median to mark off the lower half and the upper half of the numbers. And so we're still going to do that same thing. So what I mean by that is when we look at the lower half of the numbers, you're going to include 11 in that lower half of the numbers, and you're going to include the 13 in the upper half of the numbers, because that 12, which is the median in the middle, is the actual median. Okay, so now step 3, we need to find our lower quartile, otherwise known as our Q1. And just like the median, we don't have one number in the middle, right? We have two numbers here in the middle. So we're going to do the same thing we did in the previous example, that we're going to take the 4 plus 4, which is going to equal 8. 8 divided by 2 means that the lower quartile, the median of the lower half of those numbers, is technically that 4 that's halfway in between those two 4s in the lower half. So now to find our upper quartile, or our Q3, we're going to have to do the same thing that we did before, where we're going to have to add the two numbers in the middle. In that case, it's going to be 19 plus 22, which gets us 41. I believe if I did that right. 41 divided by 2 means that our upper quartile is going to be that number that is halfway in the middle, which means it's going to be 20.5. So now we have found our lower quartile, or our Q1, is 4. Our median, otherwise known as the Q2, is 12. And finally, our upper quartile, or our Q3, is 20.5.